the actual committee meeting where we review and discuss topics of interest to the school district that we talk to the administrators about. After the board has had time to ask all their questions, then members of the audience may come up and ask particular questions or make comments about the individual items, only on those particular items that we're addressing at that particular time. It's not a time for general comments, just addressing that particular issue. I'm making one exception tonight. Originally scheduled with the PEL study, what originally scheduled for tonight was the Pennsylvania Economy League study on our growth in the district. Unfortunately, early this week, they weren't able to get all the information completed in time to have a report to give to the board, so that will be rescheduled for next Thursday. I apologize to any of the people that came specifically to hear that, but they weren't ready, and I felt it was more important to have a complete story, correct and ready to go, rather than a half-completed report at this time. So they will be here next Thursday to do that. What we have done, in fact, is added another item onto the agenda tonight that's not really for discussion, but it's an item that we would normally have on our Thursday meetings, the action meetings, is a report from our chief negotiator, the personnel director, Mr. Fred Schmidt. He will be talking in terms of a brief report on the contract, of the status of the negotiations that we have with on the teacher's contract. Since this is kind of an unusual topic that we're going to talk about in terms of it's not normally scheduled for this kind of a meeting, I will allow an audience to ask questions after his report. In the interest of time, what I'd like to do, since the strike has been going on for over 3 weeks now, and we had a very lengthy audience of citizens at the last meeting, I'd like you to please limit your comments to 2 or perhaps 3 minutes so that everyone can speak. And we do have some other topics that may get lengthy, so I'd like to cover those first. Once we get by the comments, then we'll go on to the other items, okay? With that, Mr. Schmidt, are you prepared to give us some status, please? Thank you.
Yes, I am. Thank you. Good evening. I did want to make everyone aware that the teachers will be returning on Friday, November the 11th at their regularly scheduled times. And this has been confirmed in writing, in a written agreement actually, between the NPEA and the North Penn School District. We do have assurances that since we're continuing to work under the old contract, that all the activities and the other kinds of things that occurred under that contract will continue to occur again. Both the North Penn School District and the NPEA have agreed to go to the non-mandatory binding arbitration, the mandatory non-binding arbitration. This process will begin within the next week, and more likely than not will take a couple of months to complete. This afternoon, Mrs. Mengel, Mr. Weitz, and I were in the offices of the State Bureau of Mediation, and we were there at the request of the state mediator, Mrs. Jill Leeds Rivera. The purpose of that meeting was to determine the method used in arbitration, and the method that was chosen will be issue by issue. It's the board's sincere hope that this step in the process will in fact turn out to be the magical step whereby we can finally get closure on the negotiations process. Mr. Bowman, I think that's about the end of my report.
Great. Are there any questions from the board concerning Mr. Schmidt on the status of the contract? If not, I'll open it up to any members of the audience who wish to ask any questions or make any comments. Please make sure when you come to the mic that you state your name and where you live for the record. Is there anyone out there that would like to do that? Okay, fine. We'll move on to the next item, which is now elementary ed, the Bridle Path NAP attendance areas. Charlie, Mr. Keffer?
Thank you, Mr. Bowman. At the last meeting, the board requested some additional information to deal with this problem, and we have attempted to provide that this evening. For those who may not have been here before, I'd just like to take a minute to frame up what the problem is. Last year, anticipating having 6th graders in the elementary schools and also opening 2 brand new elementary schools this fall, a committee revised the attendance areas for all of the elementary schools. And in 12 of those 13 school situations, the plan worked out as we had hoped it would. In the case of the Bridle Path School, the plan anticipated that there would be about 660 youngsters, but because that school serves one of the most rapidly growing portions of the district, the number that actually appeared was 728, nearly 60 more youngsters than we had thought would be there. Subsequent to that time, we've learned now that there are two developments, Penn Forest and Holly Manor, which developers propose to build in the area that's bounded by the Lansdale Catholic High School property, Lansdale Avenue, Holly and Rosewood Drives, and Line Street. We know that there will be 76 houses in that area. We know that some of those will begin to be occupied in the spring and then built out as they are sold from that point on. If we take the Winfield Estates development as an example of houses that are of similar value and right next door, we know that there are 25 houses. We also know that those 25 houses produce 16 youngsters of K to 6 grade levels who attend public school. So using that data, one could project that with the new 76 houses, we would probably produce approximately 50 youngsters distributed in some manner unknown to us at this point across those 7 grade levels. We know as background that if we put all of those children into the Bridle Path School with the 728 youngsters who already exist there and probably more to come, we will have badly overcrowded that school. So our original proposal was to simply transfer these 2 new developments, Penn Forest and Holly Manor, to the Knapp School. And I think in the prior discussion, several board members had some concerns about the fact that we would in fact be creating an island. The original proposal was based on what I believe to be the board's concern expressed last year about movement of children. But it's clear, at least to me, that if we are having trouble with the concept of an island, the only way to resolve that is that we have to move children again next year. Having said that as background to help those in the audience who might not have been familiar with the prior discussion, I'd just like to call your attention to the information in your packets. I think the members of the audience have them, and it is in the packet that should have been at your place tonight. What I did with that data, I started by showing our current situation. So the first section labeled current enrollment 94-95 shows you that the Bridle Path School, we have the 728 youngsters. In the first column, it shows you exactly the distribution of that number from grades K to 6. In the second column, it also shows you the number of classrooms it takes to house that number of students. The significant fact is that the Bridle Path School contains 30 classrooms. It takes precisely 30 classrooms to deal with room space for kindergarten through grade 6. Underneath that, in the second column, you will see LS, which means learning skills. It's a special education program. It takes a room to do that. We don't have a space, so the faculty room this year has been converted to a classroom in which that program operates. The teachers use a planning space in lieu of the faculty room. We have a gifted program in that building as we do in all others. There is no space for that, and so one of the small music practice rooms that is designed for band and strings lessons houses that particular program, and the 2 music teachers double up in schedules that are back-to-back. Not the most comfortable arrangement, but one that we have found necessary because we simply don't have space. The art room in that building and the music room are gone, and that's how we get to the 30 classrooms in that building. That building was built for about 750 youngsters, and you can see that we're very, very close to that number. If you turn your attention to the NAP school, the methodology I used is the same. You can see the number of students by grade. It's 441 as a total. In the second column, you can see the number of classrooms devoted to each grade level. I would point out that in the second grade, there are 52 youngsters, yet we are working with 2 classrooms. The normal standard is that 25 in the primary grades is the max, 28 in the intermediate grades is the max, but in this case, we have employed an aide in part because we simply don't have additional room space to go to. And underneath it, you can see again, there are 2 learning support classes. The gifted program operates in a seminar room. There is an art room. There is no music room, and that takes us to the 21 classrooms that are available. So if you can keep in mind that the Bridle Path School has 30 classrooms, the NAP School has 21 existing, I think that's helpful. What I did, I went on then to look at what the possibilities would be to deal with this problem. And as the staff and I worked with that, we identified essentially 3. The first one, labeled option 1, is essentially the proposal that we made last month. However, some additional work also uncovered some facts that we were not aware of at that time. If we take the 94-95 enrollment at the Bridle Path School and we simply project that ahead, in other words, the kindergartners become the first graders become the second graders, and so on, and in the absence of data for the kindergarten incoming, we make the assumption, as we traditionally do, that it will be the same. That's as good as any other assumption we might make. It would tell us that we can expect 761 youngsters in the Bridle Path School next fall, give or take. And if I were betting, it'll be higher than that if we do nothing. In the second column, you can see the numbers of classrooms that would be required to deal with that. And that number would be 31 to deal with K-6 alone. And it would mean that we would still use the faculty room and the music practice room. There would still not be an art room or a music room. I think we would have badly loaded that school, and this means that the 50 projected youngsters in the 2 developments under discussion would have to be added on top of that number. So if nothing else happened, you would have a student body there of more than 800 youngsters. It would be very much like what we lived with at Montgomery through last year, and I think a number of board members had some real concerns, and rightfully so, about that situation. I also need to point out that there is a development of 68 townhouses that is going in on Cowpath Road right next door to the Montgomery Township building. We have no real way to know how many youngsters that's going to produce, but they also will have to go to the Bridle Path School. So I think there are real problems in saying we should keep that Penn Forest or Holly Manor development in the Bridle Path School. I think that's fairly clear from this kind of information. On the other hand, if we look at the NAP school, next year you can see that we would expect some 450 youngsters. It would take us 20 classrooms, as you see, distributed to handle the K-6 enrollment. It would still be the 2 learning support classes. The gifted program would still be in the seminar room. There would not be art and there would not be music. And that alone takes us to 22 classrooms that we would need. There are only 21. In addition to that, if you look over at the last column where I've talked about seats available, I need to point out, and let's take the first grade as an example. There are 59 youngsters that we anticipate in the first grade next year. The maximum class size is 25. So with 3 classrooms, we could comfortably deal with 75 youngsters. The difference between the 59 that we think will be there and the maximum class size would be 16. And if you use that same method all the way down, you can see the numbers of youngsters that we could accommodate in that school with the number of rooms that are listed. Now, if we anticipate that there would be 50 more youngsters, then you have to think about distributing 50 over the whole K-6 spectrum. When you do that, at the kindergarten and first and third, fourth, and fifth levels, the number of available seats would handle that easily, unless you had some fluke where 30 of them turn up in one grade, which is highly unlikely. But it also shows that at the second grade, there would be only 5 available seats, and at the 6th grade, only 4. I doubt that we could get away with that. And where this then takes me is that we would need to provide 1 classroom for learning support, which doesn't exist, 1 classroom for second grade, which doesn't exist, 1 classroom for grade 6, which doesn't exist. And when you get a school of that size, we need to get the gifted program out of the seminar space because the size of the groups will be greater than what that small room can accommodate. And so where this option takes us is a need for 4 classrooms. Obviously, we're not going to build 4 brick and mortar classrooms by next September. So it suggests that the solution to this problem would be for the board to consider 4 modulars as a way to do that. If you move on then to option 2, where I attempted to deal with some members' concerns about the island. Option 2, and if you look at it in conjunction with the map, you would see that it involves a transfer of the area that's bordered by Lansdale Avenue to 7th, to Line Street, to the back of the properties on Rosewood and Holly Drive. Again, I started with the Bridle Path School, and I took the enrollment as projected for that school by simply straight lining it forward to next year. And I know that there are 25 youngsters that live in the area I've just described, and they're distributed according to the numbers in that second column. If you subtract those from the Bridle Path enrollment, you see that it comes down to 736. You see the distribution of classrooms that we list. It gets us back down to the 30 where we are currently. We still use the faculty room, we still use the music practice room, but we do wind up with the ability to handle that enrollment. You also see the number of available seats at each grade level that we would be able to accommodate additional youngsters. I think that says fairly clearly that we could handle enrollment that would come out of the townhouses and most probably be okay to handle whatever additional enrollment might come through additional houses in that attendance area, because there's no major big development going. There are small amounts of building, and of course we always have the problem, which throws our numbers off, houses sell in which there are no children to families who have children. But I think that with the exception of the second grade, where we only have 2 available seats, we would be okay with that. You might ask the question, what do we do about the second grade? Well, if it goes beyond the class size guidelines, then that's perhaps where we consider the use of some aides to support the teachers, and that's common to what we do, what we are doing right now in a number of cases within the district. If you look at the effect of that at Knapp, again, you start with the 451 youngsters. You add those 25 children to bring you to 476, a number that we can work with. That distributes itself over 20 classrooms. We still have the 2 classrooms we need for special ed. We have the gifted listed here as still in the seminar room. Brings us back again to that 22 classrooms, and we only have 21 to begin with. If you look at the seats available column, we're in pretty good shape to handle 50 additional youngsters, except, again, at grades 2 and 6, where it's highly unlikely that the distribution would work out, that we would not get more than one first grader or more than 3 sixth graders. And so what, again, this option suggests is we need a classroom for second grade, one for sixth grade, one for the learning support program, and again, one for the gifted program for the same reasons. So this one also would indicate that to do this comfortably, we would need the 4 modulars. The third option is really just an extension of the second one. The only difference is this time it takes the whole area from Lansdale Catholic property, Lansdale Avenue, Line Street, all the way to Cowpath. And if you do that, we're talking now about 38 youngsters, which we would subtract from the Bridle Path enrollment and gets it down to 723, within a few youngsters of where it is currently. You can see the impact of that. You can see the number of seats available. When you go over to NAP, you can see again by adding the 38 to the 451 brings it to 489. You can see the room distribution. And again, you have to consider that we're going to add some 50 youngsters to that enrollment from these new houses. When you look at the seats available, it's clear that it is doable, again, this time until you get to grades 4, until you get to grade 6, because if you distribute 50 kids, it's hard to believe that only one more of those would be a 6th grader, and the 7 in 4th grade is a gamble. The end-up result is the same situation. A classroom for 4 that we don't have, for 6 that we don't have, for one of the special ed programs, and for the gifted program. So it's taking, the data is taking us in the direction of some additional classrooms, no matter which option you choose. And the only way out of that is to say we're not going to do anything and just let the enrollment at the Bridle Path School go to wherever it goes, which I think is unthinkable. I'd be open to the board's questions.
If I understand, every option shows 4 modulars at NAP.
Yes.
Is there any advantage to putting 4 modulars at Bridle Path instead?
Well, I would not recommend that, and the reason I would not recommend that is a very strong belief. I think that a 30 classroom building, a 750, 60 school is quite large for an elementary school. The board may remember back to the time, I'm not sure any of you were sitting at that point, but when we first began the construction at the Montgomery School, when the board realized at that time that we needed to expand the Montgomery School, the administration believed that we should build no more than 26 classrooms to keep the enrollment to about 625 or so. I think it was Mrs. Shields at that time pointed out to us quite correctly that we were in an environment where we needed space and we needed it quickly, and the board at that time agreed to raise the number to 30 classrooms, but there was a lot of concern about doing that. Subsequent to that time, as you know, when we built the Gwinnett Square School, the Bridle Path School, and the Walton Farm School, 30 became the standard. But I think all we have to do is look at the situation that we got into at Montgomery last year when the enrollment got well over 800. We added a modular there, and I think Mrs. Curley, the principal there, who I thought was a very creative and a very hardworking person, constantly talked about the difficulties inherent for a principal to try to deal with that many youngsters, that many families, the problems that you get into when you try to put that many kids through a cafeteria program daily, the scheduling overlaps that creates because you can't schedule enough gym time for those youngsters using one person. It takes 6.5 days a week to do that, And so even though we built some of the newer schools with the fold-down wall, we can make do with that, but it's not a good situation. And I would say to the board, having been an elementary principal myself for nearly 20 years, it does have a significant impact on what happens to youngsters, particularly at a time when we are attempting to personalize an education for children. Those kinds of numbers really make that very difficult when you're talking about 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10-year-old children.
If I can put you on the spot a little bit, this is ugly business doing this.
Sure is.
I've watched this for years and the emotions that go through it. It's obvious that somebody's going to have to move. What way do you think is the most permanent way based on the crystal ball? Meaning, let's
Well,
not
Bill,
do this again if possible. I know I'm asking a lot, but
I
which
like the
has
way
the
you-
most percentage of success?
Okay. I think we should understand, I can understand that as a board member, you would not want to move children, and as a school administrator, I would not want to move children, and as a parent, I certainly wouldn't be eager to do that. But I think we have a responsibility here to house a growing student population, and I further think we have a responsibility to do that in terms of how can we maintain a class size that is reasonable and productive. And I think that in order to do that, which I think is very highly valued in this community, I think from time to time the board is going to have to move children. We sometimes can't have everything we want. We don't want to move youngsters, but we do want class size. And sometimes it just is not compatible between those two ideas. You're looking at the person who was responsible for redistricting the whole area last year. I said I would never do that again. That was not a pleasant experience. But I also said, and my colleague to my right, Judy Clark, will attest to the fact that I said again and again that there is no such thing as permanent, that we hope to be right so that we can minimize these moves, and I think, in fact, we were. In 12 of the 13 cases, it worked out well. It just did not work out in this one. My crystal ball is not good enough to get to perfection. You know, if we were in baseball, if you bat 500, you're doing really well. I think we're a heck of a lot better than that, but we're not perfect. And I would never tell this board or this community that it's going to be permanent. There's no such thing as permanent.
Vicki?
I'd like to ask a question that's very much related to elementary boundaries. Last year, as we all know, we took a temporary redistricting for our middle schools, and we talked about early this fall we'd be redistricting and realigning for next school year. And as you know, Charlie, last year at that time, my concerns were based on making sure that we weren't having 3 sets of carpenters building the 3 sets of floors, and perhaps when they come together, the plumbing isn't matching up. I would like to know, with this realignment, are there likely to be any future surprises for the parents in that island when it comes to the redistricting for the middle schools? My concern is over a section of Tolmanson, Keeler Road, they were redistricted, they focused on their children at the elementary level, and then to find out that the direction of the next committee would be to keep elementary schools together. Therefore, that switch from Inglewood to Walton Farm extended for a greater period of time than they expected by changing their school from Penfield to Penndale. And, you know, we moved back on those plans, and we still have to go forward and develop that. But could this end up being where Knapp is going to one sending middle school while Bridle Path is going to another middle school, and this would be a surprise? I would rather the parents who are being affected here at least know all the different aspects and how far this can reach. One way or another, at least let's, you know, prepare them for whatever.
Vicki, I don't think it's for me to answer the question about what the middle school boundary lines would be like. I have no clear picture that the Bridle Path School is going in one direction and the NAP School going in the other. I do not know that.
So
And I
basically,
don't
it's
think,
totally
and I
unknown
don't
if
think
that would...
we will know that in a time frame that helps us solve this particular problem.
I know we've, with the strike, a lot of committees have been held back, but do we have any timelines for when we want to begin working on this so that we're prepared for secondary boundaries?
Vicki, one of the things we're waiting for is the PEL report. We can straight line projection, we can do straight line projections of the elementary and middle school and come up with an estimate of what we think the enrollments are going to be in the schools next year, but we've really been waiting to get that report. And as you
Then
know,
establish a committee.
our original intent was we thought we were going to get that October 20th. It was delayed. We thought we were going to get it tonight, and the PEL assures us that we will have that report for next Thursday, and then we can sit and look at those numbers and begin to talk about middle school attendance boundaries
And establishing a committee. or
and
whatever.
establish a committee
Or the board.
or committee of the board to work on that, as was suggested last spring.
Charlie,
Tom?
did you consider looking at the line at the bottom right of the diagram that you presented, where 202 is Doylestown Pike? You can see the line that breaks up that development that sends kids to either Montgomery or Bridle Path. Did you look at that at all and say that that would not be an option? I know we don't want to fill Montgomery up again right away, but looking at it from Mora, it's a larger highway. It's a highway that kids aren't going to cross. And I know we certainly want to be sympathetic to parents who have kids that play across the street from the other. But
Are you talking about Turner Field?
I'm talking right here, like taking this line right where it says Montgomeryville.
South of Pencrest.
Yeah, south of Pinecrest, and then putting a thick line right on 202. I have no idea how many kids are in that area.
There are not very many youngsters in Pinecrest at all. Probably.
No, it's below Pinecrest.
Below
Is that
Pinecrest.
Westgate?
Small line across 202.
South of 202.
Where is he?
I think he's talking about Westgate. Is that around Canterbury?
Everything south of 202 to go to Montgomery.
There are far more youngsters in there than you could ever deal with. I will tell you that. I would suggest to you that part of that's Montgomery Grind. I would suggest to you there might be 70, 80 youngsters in there alone. And when we went through that before, we've moved that area a couple of times already. 3 times, Mrs. Clark reminds me. And the problem in that whole area is where you draw a good line. You're going to divide a neighborhood, if we do that. And I think if there's concern about the island, and I understand, some of that concern, because these are youngsters that don't live in Penn Forest or Holly Manor yet. But if you look at way the streets connect, I understand the problem with the island. And I think, Tom, this doesn't do a whole lot more, because when we've dealt with this area before, the folks who live there, Ralph is nodding his
Ralph
head
has
because
pointed it out.
he lived through it.
Yeah.
And they
We've
reminded
been
us.
through it too. We're on Keeler Road, so
Right.
we knew what boundaries are all
Right.
about. And, as a board member, I can say
Right.
that I experienced that, and Keeler Road always seems to be the hot point. So,
Yep.
and I can feel for parents who are out there. I know what it's like.
So I think that there are just too many kids, down there to deal with
Charlie?
that.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'll go ahead.
Yeah, I have several concerns, Charlie. One is, I guess I'm concerned because one of the objectives I assumed from a year ago, and you're right, 12 of them worked out. But when I look at the numbers in your projected enrollment for 95, 96, it shows if we do nothing, correct? It shows that we need 3 new classrooms between those 2 buildings.
4, Ralph.
Oh, I'm looking at the bottom of option 1. You say 31 and 22 classrooms needed, which I think tells me that we need 1 at each, isn't it?
Well, you need a special ed, you need a 2nd grade, a 6th grade, and you need a gifted.
Okay. I guess what I guess my concern is if you take that projection to the other buildings, what are we looking at? There's more classrooms at each of these two buildings. Do the others have the same problem when you project enrollment up to this year? And I think that to pick up on Mrs. Scher's point, that while nobody wants to go through this again, it was a year ago, I pulled out my packet. Here's something from November 9th of 1993
Right,
that I'm
looking
going to
at
quote from in a minute. Nobody wants to go through that again, but I think we need to make sure that we've got our elementary classrooms deployed properly. And I think that while 12 out of 13 is good, I think that we ought to look at that just to reconfirm as we look at, and we do have to look at secondary boundaries. But I do have some questions, and I think that there is maybe one other place. And when I looked at the November 9th, 1993 packet, there were projections. And if you look at tonight's packet, the numbers for your option 2, and I think your option 2 calls for 476 students at NAP. And I'm looking at a document that came out as we were revising, and we were in the middle of revising these, and it's from a November 9th, 1993 meeting, and it shows 475 students at NAP under one of the proposals.
Correct.
I don't even know if this was right, and 21 classrooms, and the difference is LS, learning support, where there were 2, and there were comments about moving them to Walton Farm.
You can't.
And I understand the issues, but at that time, a year ago, we were talking about having 1 learning support there. We now have 2. And I guess one of the issues that I would like to have looked at between now and Thursday, and I understand some of it's not nice, but it's not nice that we got surprised. And I want to see, because we do have buildings that have more space in them. Montgomery's got 600 students in it. It's the same size as Bridle Path with 700 and some. I would like to see what our viabilities is, either on a normal basis, if we have some classes that have been somewhere for 5 years, where we can move it to a building where we have room for 5 years to do that naturally, or on an emergency basis, because we now have 2 learning support. A year ago, we were planning having 1 learning support at NAP. If we had the 1, right now, option 2 would work if we had 1 learning support at NAP instead of 2. But I'd like to hear the response.
Let's let Judy Clark speak to that, because there are good reasons why we went from 1 to 2, and I think she can address your question.
I'd like, yeah.
It's not easy to do straight line enrollment projections on learning support. We registered 34 students this year. We had no idea they were coming in. Many of those students ended up at the NAP school. With the learning support classes, we have always kept those children in their home school because we follow the state regulation of least restrictive environment. The classes that we moved last year were the trainable mentally retarded classes to Walton Farm, but those classes are few in number, and we are required to keep them in a building for 5 years. If, in fact, we moved the learning support classes, we would be totally out of kilter with what we've done for the last 20 years. And we would be moving those children out of the least restrictive environment for them. And that will create a problem.
All of the LS classes fall into
Into their attendance boundaries, yes. Mhm.
Now, and it just so happens that NAP has 2 classrooms full, and the Bridle Path is able to do it in a partial classroom.
Right, but it's the numbers of students within those classes and the severity of condition and the amount of time they spend. You need to remember that all those students are either part-time students or resource room students, but they do spend some of their time within the regular ed program. Our classes, which are full-time programs, are the ones where the students are totally self-contained. And those students, again, we are required by law not to move them for 5 years.
You're talking the TMR, 5 years.
Right.
Mr. Reckkamp, could you clarify for the administration, what you'd like us to do is create for all of our schools the enrollments, the projected enrollments, the number of classrooms, so that the intent might be to look and see if we can redistrict all the elementary? So
I guess what my concern was as we hit 2, my concern is, do we have more? Because I'm looking at 3 options here, and all of them call for additional classroom space above what we have. And we're looking at 2 buildings. And I guess my question is there more? And I would think that as we go do the middle school and the high school boundaries, I think we committed to do that. As we do that, we ought to also be aware of what these are and to make sure that we have our boundaries, that we have physical facilities to support those. Because we've looked at 2 and we found that next year we're going to have problems at 2 of the elementaries. Is it farther? We have to understand that, or we're going to be going into middle school and high school boundaries and be sitting here on very shaky ground because we're going to be moving the elementaries again in a year. I think we don't have to change them, but I think we have to understand what that is so that we go into middle school and secondary, we're there.
I think what you're asking us to do is to give you a chart similar to the one that we provided when the attendance areas were realigned last year that shows what we think is going to happen with the 95-96 enrollment. Is that what you're after?
I think that we ought to, once the PEL numbers are available, we ought to take it probably beyond 95, 96 and see if our elementary structure is supported by, that our elementary physical structure will support the kind of enrollment that we're looking at in the North Penn District over the next few years, not just 1 year.
Well,
If that's what the board would like us to do, I would suggest that the timing of that not be for next Thursday.
Yeah, can't do
We're
it.
not going to have the PEL study in our hands until the end of this week, and then those numbers need to be looked at and a report generated.
I would suggest that what I'm
suggest we
talking
do
about
that
is
for
something
December.
that would roll out when we look at the middle school and the high school boundaries. I think that we have to reconfirm this to make sure that we're on solid ground in terms of bricks and mortar and where the kids are projected to be. And yes, I agree, that's not next Thursday. For next Thursday, I'm looking at, what I'm concerned is what we do now, and we have to do something by Thursday. I take the point well that we're going to have kids moving in, that we're not going to be able to support them in the building that we have now aligned to. And I appreciate, the administration looking at that. I'm not happy with it's a very temporary thing when I look at the island. And personally, option 2 is the most satisfactory to me as I see them laid out here. That gives the best hope. But I'm saying outside of that, so I'm option 2 next Thursday, personally, and I think that we need to be looking at when we get the PEL and we do the boundaries, we've got to at least reconfirm the elementaries, as ugly as that may be. I think it's necessary.
I'd like to just comment, we need to get back to the main point here, is that to accommodate the children that we already have, and that is the PEL study notwithstanding, we don't even have that. With the growth that we can project still in Montgomery Township with the new housing development on the Turner track, I don't think we have the option of trying to look and say whether Montgomery Elementary can hold the kids or whether Bridle Path can hold the kids. We're really looking at the fact that we need 4 new classrooms, and how are we going to do that? I mean, the only alternative that I see of the 4 here is to let the population just go as high as it will in Bridle Path, and I personally am not for that. I think we really need to consider how to get those 4 new classrooms in there and to do it in such a way that they're available for September of next year.
Well, David, I'd just like to point out, and Art, maybe you can help me out on this, but according to the figures that I took from the blue book that you gave us, plus the Plan Con, we do have a holding capacity for K through 6 for somewhere in the neighborhood of 7,500 kids. And I know that you can't go full 7,500, you need space here and there. And this year we're at only 7,018, which does give us some room of about 500. And I look at the numbers and I have to question, we start talking about 4 more modulars right away. I wonder if we do, and I'd like to talk a little more what Ralph had to say, is really take a look and see if the boundaries are set up properly to properly feed the schools.
Once again, Tom, I agree with you. If we look at total capacity, we do have room for 500 students somewhere. But what you're really talking about is to redistribute all the students that we have now, is to totally redistrict again for the elementary schools. And after the angst that it caused the community last year, I don't really want to go through that again.
I understand, but we really didn't solve the problem of how we will feed the future. We will, coming up with a master plan on how we will feed the middle schools, and then whether there's going to be 2 high schools or not, how we're going to feed them. If we could, that might be the time that Ralph brings up when we really have to look at it and say, okay, yeah, it's a crystal ball, and it may have to have changes again. We were making changes 20 years ago. I remember when we had kindergarten and first graders here at the high school going to school. And it's inevitable that we're going to have to make changes, but I'd like to look into a little more what Ralph says, that maybe we need to take another shot at it.
Well, again, the question in my mind comes down to, are we going to sit here and say that we're going to not do anything for next September for the population that we have, and just let the population in Bridle Path go right through the roof? Are we going to provide more classroom space and redistribute that so that we have really what is turning out to be capacity populations at all the elementary schools, and then take on the planning process one more time and say that in the year after that we're going to redistrict again to make sure that we don't have to buy more modulars, to make sure that we're plugged into the capacity, the overall capacity that we have in the district. I really think we have some immediate problems, and those are going to be addressed in a number of ways. One, fill up one school beyond its planned capacity with no space available at all for gifted rooms, art, music. I mean, Charlie has always tried to pull that out of his hat in the past and say, yeah, I've got one more classroom out there. The answer now seems to be no. I think we really got to make a very hard decision right now and say, do we meet our needs for next year? Do we put 4 more classrooms in place? I wish the PEL study had been here last month. I think it would answer a lot of questions about what we need for the high school. Do we need a second high school? The projected growth for the elementary schools. I mean, we're bursting at the seams. I personally think the PEL studies are going to show that we have a real need in the secondary level. It's not here today, but we have immediate problems. And I don't think that to sit here and say that we're going to redistrict or plan to do a whole entire redistricting again now because of these schools that are bursting in Montgomery Township is something that we or the community really has a taste for right now.
I would be concerned that you would consider redistricting all of the elementary schools to solve a problem that appears to be related to one school and may impact 31 students, that you might move hundreds of youngsters and reshuffle them just to solve the problem right here. As Mr. Kepper has pointed out to you on a number of occasions, it isn't the vacant seats in the system, it's where the distribution of youngsters occurs. If you're not interested in if you're willing to say to families, this school and this class is filled and your child is now going to have to go to this class on the other side of the district, we don't even have to address this problem. We can tell families that, okay, here's a class for second grade at York Avenue, your child can go there, and here's a 6th grade at Walton Farm, and your child can go there. He can go through this exercise again, and it's not going to be perfect. He has spent with a committee, and I'm trying to think who on the board was on that committee, months looking at elementary attendance boundaries. And if you're suggesting for him to go back and do 13 schools again, I just think it is a huge exercise.
Well, there's no assurance that if we did that, you may as well, in my opinion, do that then on an annual basis, because you cannot get hold of the distribution. You can't control it. If kids came packaged in neighborhoods in neat 25s and 28s, that would be fine. But in the real world, that is never the case. And I will tell you that that committee worked from August through November to put together a lot of different combinations to get to a distribution that works. And the reality of it is, there were just dealing with the numbers of youngsters that we had at the time, because we just straight lined them all forward. You need to keep in mind, it worked in 12 of the 13 cases. I can take you to school districts where it didn't come anywhere near close to that.
Or, Charlie, another way to describe it, how many elementary classrooms do we have in the system
We
right
have
now?
281 classes.
So it's
And if we're-
worked in all but 4 for next year,
Right.
right?
And I
4
would
out of
also say,
280.
if the community's value is class size, I can report to the board, there are only 14 elementary school classrooms that are over the class size guidelines. That's 5%. That's a very, very positive record.
Well, I think what that points to, Charlie, and you're getting to the crux of the problem here, is that we're having a lot of movement inside and outside the district and within the district. We have people moving from one elementary school area to another, and that our plan to redistribute the children only works for the following year that we're going to do it. For example, we now have 70 or 80 children more, I guess about 70, from 662 to 730 or so. That's about 70 children more at Bridle Path than we had originally thought would be there this year. Obviously, the new housing development here that's in question that has brought this to the forefront has further exacerbated that problem. But I think what we're seeing here is that we have now basically a domino effect. We've had more people move in here, which means that we should have really shrunk this size, which we should have made some other areas bigger or encompassed other areas, and it's never going to be perfect.
Let me just comment on that. If you look at, when we looked at the Bridle Path School, the committee concluded that 662 was a good number because we looked at the available space. We looked at what was still buildable and those kinds of factors, and we thought that the number would not go nearly as high as it did, obviously. Today, I looked at a list that I had generated for me of who are the youngsters that have moved in to, so to speak, cause this problem. They are not coming from a development. Most of those youngsters are coming from houses that were sold, they turned over. There are more kids living in those houses than there were in the past. Now, there are also some scattered developments in that. I am not surprised that the number exceeded 662, because I also looked across other schools today. It's not unique to Bridle Path that we had increased numbers of kids, and it's logical. The chart that we presented last year simply straight-lined forward existing enrollments. We grew by 280-some kids, I think, in elementary this year.
Yes.
So those kids had to be factored on top of this. And again, I point out that no one can tell you exactly where they're going to come. And yet, in most schools, it worked out. There are some schools where the number is actually less than we thought it would be. But that same distribution that gives us a variety of vacant seats in every building has helped us accommodate those overages that we experience in other schools. It's just that in this one, it went beyond what we thought we could cope.
Charlie, the point of my comment, David, just let me finish, is that the whole idea behind having overcapacity one year, the next year could very well be under capacity depending on the demographic movement within the district.
Right.
We're never going to find a solution unless we redistrict every year to try to do that. I think what we have to get down to is how do we solve this particular problem without further impacting the rest of the district. I mean, I hate to have to put modulars at a new school or a school when we've just built 2 new elementary schools. But given the shifting of the population and the number of children, we may have to put those 4 at Knapp this year, and they may end up being at Walton Farm next year. I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball either.
Dick, if the board wishes for Thursday, I could project this year's enrollments forward to next year for all the schools. I could give you a sheet that would give you a picture of just straight lining the enrollments. That I could do by next week. If you think there are other problems that would emerge, I could do that.
I don't think that solves anything, Charlie, because what you're doing is you're projecting the number of new kindergarten students in, and you're keeping the grades the same. And if you look at the number of children in a particular grade in a particular school that move forward, it's always different. It's up or down, but it's never the same. There's always some movement in every grade in every school. That's why we have 280 more students in the elementary level than we had last year. Now, we planned for that in this redistricting, that we would have more people. And that's why we thought, I think in the factors that we used, we had at least 10% in every school where we had excess capacity, we thought. And it turns out that right now in Bridle Path, that hasn't worked out. We've used up that 10% plus. I mean, we were projecting 662 with an optimal capacity of 750. That's, more than that's 15% or so. So, what I think we need to focus on is what's the best to take care of this solution and not, ripple down and affect the rest of the district. And I don't know what that solution is just yet.
But I guess I'm going to try and restate my concern. I agree that we have to do something about here. What my concern is in September I got a document, or I think it was in September, that recommended that we make some changes in the enrollment, in the attendance areas. It did not say we needed 4 new classrooms, even if we did that. Tonight I've got the document that option 1 proposes the same alignment we got in September and says we need 4 new classrooms. And when I look back at what we did a year ago, these 2 buildings were not the tightest. North Wales was far tighter. Oak Park was tighter than Napa is when I look at the enrollment. And my concern is if we don't look, and there was an extra look between September and now, and 4 classrooms came out of that extra look at 2 buildings. And if we're going forward with redistricting middle schools at a minimum, we have got to understand where this is. And when we get the new PEL numbers, I'm not necessarily suggesting we have to redistrict elementary, but if between September and now, looking at it again says 4 new classrooms, and I know that there are some other buildings that are also tight, we need to take a look at the PEL numbers once they're in, apply them to the elementary boundaries that we have, and make sure we don't have more problems, because if we do have building to do, we've got to know about it, because now is tight to get some buildings, some classrooms, no matter what option we choose, in place for September. And I think we need to know if there are more out there. And given that there's a difference of what happened between September and now, I think it's worth the look once we get the PEL numbers.
Well, and if you look at option 2, in my just quick look at this year's a problem perhaps if we get children that move into that area that are in 3rd or 6th grade. But it's not a problem because the 3rd graders then move to 4th, and now the classroom size increases to 28. So now, because there's 3 classrooms, that gives us 9 more available seats in the classroom for those 4th graders. So if there's a preponderance of 3rd graders that move to 4th grade in that area, we would still be able to accommodate 9. The 6th graders would no longer be in the school next year. Therefore, we wouldn't have to worry about that problem. And based on a projection for the number of kids in the kindergarten, there looks like plenty of excess capacity there.
Dick, you do realize that the numbers you're looking at,
Are they already moved ahead a year?
they are moved ahead already.
Okay, I'm sorry. So you've moved,
Right.
what you show as the 3rd grade is actually next year's 3rd grade rather than this
Well-
year's 3rd grade. Or 2nd grade, I'm sorry.
The 2nd grade, right.
I'm looking at the wrong line.
What I did is I took the 94, 95, moved it forward. If you look at the top, I'm saying projected enrollment 95, 96. Perhaps you overlooked that.
Okay. So really, our problem is essentially second grade, I'm sorry.
Right.
It's second
Second
grade.
and sixth.
And second grade doesn't go away for 2 more years. Okay. I was following the line across incorrectly. I'm like Ralph, though. I'm still having a problem to find out where that translates into 4 new classrooms.
Would you like me to review that?
That would help.
Okay. In addition to the numbers of students you see there, we need to provide space for 50 more. I can't break that down by grade level because I have no idea of what they will be. But I think logic would say they will, in all probability, they will distribute themselves over K to 6. If you look at the seats available at NAP, the kindergarten represents absolutely no problem. We are not going to get a number that exceeds that. I bet you dinner on that. 12 in first grade is probably adequate, as is the 16, the 10, and the 18 in grades 3, 4, and 5. I think it's very probable that there will be more than one first grader in that 50 to come. And I think it's also very probable that there will be more than 3 sixth graders. So that tells me that we need a classroom for second grade, we need a classroom for sixth grade. If you look at the 2 LS classes that I've included, one of those doesn't exist because there are only 21 classrooms in that building. So that's the third one.
Okay.
And the fourth one is, I'm suggesting that the seminar room that we currently use for gifted at NAP is already small to accommodate the group sizes. It's not a full-size classroom. And I'm saying as this school increases, the number of youngsters that are identified as gifted increases at each grade level, the group size goes up, and that space is not going to be adequate to house that. So that's how I get the fourth one.
Okay. But if we looked at just doing the island and not doing that whole area, that alleviates moving 25 children. And
Well, if you go back to the island, which is essentially option 1,
yeah.
As I indicated, as I pursued that concept a little further and actually plotted that out, I had originally said, yes, we can handle those youngsters at the NAP school. But when I got finally to looking at it grade by grade, that distribution presents us with the very same problem. Because again, if you look at second grade and sixth grade, the number of available seats is very slim. At other grade levels, it's not a problem, but it is at those two. And
So
you
we
still
could-
need the special ed room and the gifted room. So you're at 4. You're at four classrooms under any of these 3 options.
It's ugly. Any other questions? Charlie?
Dick, between now and next Thursday, we should have the PELs, and maybe that'll shed a little
The
clarity.
problem is they don't break it out by demographics, by area, by...
They do have the developments.
They do have the number of children in the particular grades, but they don't have where they live in the district, and that's what's part of our problem.
The detailed
We have
PELs.
movement within
Right.
the areas, and that's what helped cause some of this problem.
Vicki, the PEL is not going to address this specific problem because we're talking here about youngsters that already exist. And then you're talking beyond that about how 50 unknown youngsters are going to distribute themselves. So I really don't think the PEL is going to impact on what we do between Bridle Path and NAP on this particular problem.
The
I understand.
The PEL in the past has taken elementary attendance boundaries and made some projections, but you'll recall, because you attended a number of those meetings over the
Right.
years, that they said that they were very much guesstimates to come up with individual school enrollment growth. The other problem for the PEL, even if we asked them to do this, is they have no historical data for these elementary attendance boundaries. They've all been changed, and so there's no track record on these elementary attendance boundaries so that they can make predictions about them.
I think my only point was that with some of the questions that were here regarding how the other schools are looking, room is perhaps looking beyond the two that Charlie's brought here, my thoughts were that when they receive the PELs and everyone's looking through, they just might see the reflection of some of that growth, like Turner Airport and the properties behind the Hall Farm and et cetera. And because they do it by usually demographic location as far as what development that growth expected from it can help to a degree.
I frankly
was
believe when
projections.
you see the PEL and look at those elementary enrollments, you're going to be sitting here in a month or two talking about more than 4 modular classrooms. You're going to be talking about
You will.
modular classrooms on North Wales Elementary School, additional modular classrooms on Gwyn Nor, probably additional modulars beyond the 4 at NAP, just as a start.
Sure.
Well, that's what I mean. They would maybe get a better picture of the growth and the different numbers that are going to be juggled, to get a perspective of what you're saying here, Charlie, tonight with being
Well,
unable to...
I've already offered that I could produce projecting forward. That's a good base. And I could do that in a relatively short period of time. And I would suggest to you that's the same method I have used for 13, 14 years to get at what is going to happen next year. It's not foolproof, but it has a rather high degree of accuracy. The second thing that I have always done is take a look at what the PEL suggests. They will tell us, we could probably get them to give us a pretty good idea by percentage of whatever the increased students are going to be, which municipality they're going to come in. And working from that, we can get as close as I think you could expect to get in terms of what's going to happen. I mean, it's going to be no secret. We all know that Cutler has approval to build 390 houses on Turner Field. That is in the Gwyn Nor attendance area. There is no way in this world that the youngsters coming out of that development are going to fit at the Gwyn Nor School. And that's what I think leads to Dr. Elko's statement, is that this board is going to have to do more than these 4 modulars ultimately to deal with that. I think Mr. Wood not very long ago shared there were some other major developments that are going in the community as well. So we know that we're going to have to do more. I simply don't have, as David pointed out, too many more art music rooms in the right schools to pull out of the hat. Folks, the hat is rapidly getting empty. We are operating at an incredibly tight margin. There is not an unused classroom in this system anywhere. And that's a reality, and that's what makes this year-to-year problem so difficult. Because the occupancy rate is incredibly high in elementary schools.
Charlie, based on your comments and based on Alan's comments, would it be wise to take a good long look at the PEL studies as they're coming out, which clearly indicates which of the available properties in all the townships are under development now, will be under development? That's the kind of data they collect. And to take the issue of NAP and Bridle Path and postpone that for a very short period of time to be able to maybe see if the data indicates that we should be taking a much broader look at the entire elementary school picture to see, again, if it's accurate that we'll need modulars in many places. We should look at a much broader picture rather than just this school and this problem right now.
I want to be clear about one thing. I think the suggestion is appropriate as long as that's done in December. You know, we faced a situation this past year where we kept going on and on and on the CULP situation, and those modulars ended up being delivered and installed when, Art? When did we get them? By November?
Yeah. Art, what is the appropriate time frame to sit there and say, I will have them ready for September? How much lead time is required? The whole 6 months or the whole 9 months, right? Right?
Because of municipal approvals and everything that's involved in taking the process all the way through.
I'm not suggesting, when I commented earlier about needing modulars at other schools, I'm not suggesting that for next year, but over the next couple of years, it's going to be very, very clear as Charlie talks about these
And again, it was
developments.
my point that if we have the kind of data that we need to take a much broader view of our entire elementary school population, if we choose to believe the projections that are coming out of the PEL for both elementary and secondary, then it might be appropriate to understand exactly what we need to do for the 95-96 school year as well as beyond, and begin to understand what the total picture is. And again, not to put ourselves in a bind for what we need to do for next September with, if indeed we do need those modulars. So it was only the suggestion of a short postponement to get a much broader picture.
I think that's prudent. Any other questions from the board or comments?
I agree with David.
Okay.
Then we will come back in December at the committee meeting with that information.
Okay, great. Any comments or questions from the audience? Lori?
I'm Lori Anderson. I live at 308 Abbey Lane in Montgomeryville. I have two immediate and inexpensive ways that will add some clarity to your crystal ball. There are 4 townships in our school district that are facing expanded growth. In order of the amount of growth, I believe it's Montgomery, Towmenson, Upper Gwinnett, and Hatfield. Each one of these townships has a township manager. Each one of these townships has a planning commission. It's my impression that at least the director of the planning commission in Montgomery Township has never been contacted by the school district. I encourage the school district till tomorrow, contact the township managers and set up maybe perhaps a summit of the planning commission officials so you guys can sit down with a big map, lots of erasers and some coffee and say, show us your plans, what's coming in tomorrow, what's coming in next week, what's coming in a year from now. They have the plans on file. They have a much better impression of PEL, of what's going to happen in their township in the next couple of years. The townhouses that you talk about here going in Montgomery Township, I believe are already some of them occupied. We're not talking about townhouses that will be built next year or the year after. There might be some tricycles in the driveway. I think this is a clear example of where the school board can work closer with local municipalities to get better information. I would also suggest that when the PEL data comes in, you send a copy of it to the planning commissions of each township to get their impression of it.
Mrs. Anderson?
Sir.
The PEL has contacted each municipality. They have gotten the exact information that you're talking about to use as part of their projections. They have taken that information and taken it back to each municipality for verification. So that's being done for the board.
I have one concern about that. When the PEL data comes here, the board debates and the public debates the veracity of those numbers. The people who sit in the planning commissions in the different townships are our neighbors. They're people that we know, that we trust, that we can develop relationships with because they live here in our community. It's just a very simple, inexpensive, fast way to cross-check information.
And please let me go on for a moment. We have a municipal relations committee in which 3 board members sit on that committee, in which every town, every municipality in this district is represented. They've discussed that. The copies of the PEL reports are going to be distributed to those municipalities for an independent verification for their respective municipalities. So that's being done as well.
This is good, and I applaud you for that. It disturbs me that up until this point in Montgomery Township, where I live, if my impression is correct, the person who heads up the planning commission there has not been contacted by any school board or school district authority. there's an opportunity for us here to develop these relationships more fully. so
Your
that we can-
township was contacted. You can check with
I will-
Mr.
I will.
Walper, please.
But this, can we see here that we don't have to be, we do have to go to PEL for some data, but we can talk to our neighbors for other information. One more quick idea, and I'll get out of here. You're talking about a concern where there are students moving from elementary school to elementary school within the district as folks sell their homes and move. I would suggest that you approach the Real Estate Association in North Penn and ask them to consider perhaps an extra piece of paper folks can sign when they sign a contract on a new house. It wouldn't be mandatory, it wouldn't be an invasion of privacy. But if I'm going to move to Talmenson and I buy a house in Talmenson tomorrow, my agent could have me sign a piece of paper at contract signing saying, I suspect that at this date, my family with 2 children in grades 4 and 2 will move to Talmenson. You can then send this to the school district. You know the ages and the grades of the kids and the projected occupancy date. That it's not going to solve your problem, but it might give you a little bit more information so that you can plan ahead more fully. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Lori. Any other questions concerning the redistricting? Connie?
Hi, my name's Connie Spire, Upper Gwinnett Township. I was just wondering with this realignment, or I don't know if it's realignment is the correct word to use, but next year with the middle schools, I believe they're all going to be 7, 8, 9, all 3 schools. Will this free up any modulars that in time to be used for the elementary level?
We have no way of knowing until we actually start distributing, but based on the number of children right now in 7th and 8th and 9th and 6th for next year, it looks improbable that there'd be any excess capacity at any of those schools right now.
I was just thinking Penfield and Penn
Understand.
Brook.
But they're the smaller of the 2 middle schools, so those most likely will be closer to capacity than will Penn Dale.
So you think that they probably will still need to hang on to their modulars?
I think
The problem would be, obviously, when we go to redistrict to 7th, 8th, and 9th grade, we would be drawing down the enrollments at Pembroke and Penfield.
Right.
But we would be drawing them down in anticipation of continued growth with the elementary children feeding those schools. And if they were down to start and we took the modulars off, we might end up having to put modulars back on to those schools in a few years. And I think Mr. Wood would explain to you that it's very expensive taking them off, putting them on, you know, in that kind of an arrangement.
Okay. I was just trying to see how we could possibly save some money here, because it looks like as soon as we started talking about this issue, I started getting nervous, because I thought, here we're talking about these 2 elementaries, and right away I started thinking about what Ralph had said and what others have said now. What about these other schools with more and more children coming there also? We're looking at 2 schools that are going to need more, without talking about the shift here. And I do think that there are probably other ones. And if there's just so many modulars that the district can afford, then I do think we need to look at all of the elementary schools to see how we can make it fit best. Because I know the alternative, which Mr. Keffer mentioned last year, was adding an aide as the class size goes past the guidelines. And I don't think it's fair for 2 elementaries to get all the modulars and then the others, oh, well, I guess we're just going to add aides here. So I think that we really, to be responsible, do have to look at all of the elementary schools and see exactly what we can see from this point. I realize that we're not going to see the total picture until September, but I think we need to do what we can do now.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. Any other comments or questions? Ma'am, over there in the back. Yeah. Either one, fine. You can be next then, ma'am.
Hi. My name is Sharon Baker, and I live in Lansdale, and my kids go to Knapp School. And I have 4 kids. 2 are in kindergarten, one's in 2nd, and one is in 5th. And my 2nd grader is one of those that has the aids. And I've been in his classroom, and right now, his classroom looks like complete chaos. I mean, it's so overcrowded, I think. I do have one question about the modulars. I think right now they need them as of now. I think the NAP is overcrowded as it is, considering some of the, like I said, my son's second grade class. And how long would it take, once you have the modulars in place, for them to become brick and mortar? Is that the projection, is to make them permanent?
Up to this point, the modular classrooms that we have added have been substantial structures, but we have not put a brick and mortar veneer on them. That's something that can be done to modular classrooms. We have felt that the modulars that we've selected, they're not the cheapest modular classrooms to be bought, but they're not the most expensive either. They're not the Cadillacs, but they're well built, and if you've seen them in some of our other schools, we project they're going to last many, many years.
But what I'm saying is, if you need them, are you eventually going to make them permanent? I mean, as permanent classrooms, if you need them, as far as growth is concerned?
I think you could consider them to be permanent. They're going to be around for a number of years.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
My name is Eleanor O'Cotney. I live in Montgomery Township on Meadowwood Drive. I was looking at this redistricting map here, and I had a question that came to mind. Bridle Path was created by pulling children from many schools, not just Knapp School. I was wondering if there was any thought given to taking some of those children and sending them back to Culp School, or I understand some kids came from Gwyn Nor that are currently going to Bridle Path. Instead of sending everyone, assuming that this is simply a Knapp and Bridle Path problems, maybe this is a problem between some of these other elementary schools and Bridle Path. And also, all of the children in the only options that have been suggested here, all of these children come from one geographic area. It seems that there are some very wavy lines on this map cutting through other neighborhoods, where I was wondering if maybe there was any consideration to changing the attendance area in any other area that of the Knapp School attendance district.
Mrs. O'Cotney, we have not considered that. We were working with the problem between those two schools, and so we confined our explorations to that.
Okay, is there any potential that you could reconsider sending children back to more than just Knapp, or is that?
If the board directs us to do that, we would do that.
Well, I'm just asking as a, general question, sort of.
That's a possibility. For example, what's north of Walnut Street, we don't know how many children are in that area. Could they go back to Culp? Is there enough room at Culp here? Again, those are the kind of questions that we need to look at once we know a little bit more about the numbers. In December, as we suggested, we try to lock in on the plan. If there's no other solution, then we need to look at the modulars and where we're going to put them. But we look at the other options first.
Well, good luck. I don't envy you your job.
And that's why Mr. Clemens pointed out that below 202, that they might be able to move that area back into Montgomery, and I think that's the kind of solution you're suggesting. Can we move children that were already at one school, they moved this year, move them back to where they were before, something to that case. But unfortunately, as you start breaking up these areas, the clump of children because I've asked Mr. Keffer for some of the numbers in the different areas, are larger than the clump of children that we expect, for want of a better word, clump, to get out of this area that's in question in terms of the island or behind the island.
Right. Well, I'm one of those people that's in the case of move here, move back. And obviously, I would prefer not to see that happen. But I understand it's going to happen to somebody. It's very unfortunate that we're in this bind with this brand new school. More than unfortunate.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions on this? Okay. Thank you. If not, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the extra duty and extracurricular program.
Good evening.
Don's back.
What I want to do is take a little bit of time and go over a little bit of history regarding our extracurricular compensation program, and then review some of the details of the system that we have in place for compensating those people who are involved in the 220-some positions that we have in the school district, where they are advising students or coaching students or working with students beyond the school day. For the past 9 years, we've had a system of compensation in place that was very carefully developed by a committee in the mid-1980s. That system was actually developed over almost a 2-year period, where a committee examined a number of different compensation plans, researching different systems from around the country, if I recall. Mr. Schmidt was very much involved with that process at the time. And it was taken on because the system that existed prior to that was somewhat arbitrary in making determinations about the proper compensation and appropriate, fair compensation for the different kind of positions that exist. The committee was established for 2 primary reasons. Number 1 was to identify and define criteria for the assignment of group levels for all of the positions that currently existed at that time, and also to define a monitor and reviewing process to ensure that there would be fair, appropriate compensation and a monitoring process by a committee that has been functioning since the establishment of it some 9 years ago. That committee consists of 6 administrators, 6 teachers, and meets 3 times a year to consider the assignment of new positions, some of which you've just discussed and reviewed in recent months, to hear appeals from people who are in positions in which the position has changed as far as the components of the job description are concerned, and also to periodically review that system, to update it, something that was done this past year as we introduced many of the middle school extra duty positions. One thing that I want to point out is the committee has no authority nor responsibility to make recommendations for the establishment of a position. That process involves a recommendation that comes from a principal through the director of secondary ed, and then, if warranted, onto the board. So the establishment of a new position is not the role of this committee. The role is to actually examine proposals for review or change of the system, or to determine whether or not or what the particular group assignment should be for a particular position. In the packet that you have, there is a detailed description of the essential elements of that compensation system, and I wanted to take a little bit of time and review some of the details with you. First of all, I'll point out that there are 7 different group assignments for different positions, and there's a detail of that also in the appendix section that I'll touch on a little bit later. The group receiving or having the positions for having the highest responsibility are in Group 7, those with the least responsibility in Group 1. Beginning on page 1 in the packet is the information regarding how this point system was developed to help determine the number or the positions that would exist and their appropriate group assignment. If you look on page 1, you can see the descriptions of the different components or different essential elements that are included in the process. First of all, important things considered include student contact hours, which are actual hours that a coach spends or coach or advisor spends beyond the regular day for events, for meetings, for practice, and there are a certain number of points assigned to the number of hours associated with that responsibility. Secondly, there are points assigned for preparation and planning that is necessary for that organization to function. That includes record keeping, completing of reports, also the scouting for athletic contests that many of the assistant coaches are involved with. The third component has to do with the involvement or the degree of involvement on weekends, over holidays, and vacation times. There are additional points beyond school day time, and these are incorporated into that element. On page 2, the exposure of a particular activity is a factor that was considered, and this relates to the amount of parental contact that's required, the size of crowds where an athletic event in particular might be playing, the kinds of media coverage and exposure that are involved, and any other public relations responsibilities that add to the complexities of the job. There are standardized point categories for the different organizations, and you can see those at the top of page 2 in the packet. Also, obviously, the number of students that are supervised plays a role in determining the level assignment of the position. For an athletic activity, that involves an average number of the number of students who try out for the activity, the number who are participating at the end of the 6th day of practice, and the number that actually finish the season. There's an average determined and then points assigned based on whatever that average number is. For non-athletic activities, it's a little bit different, obviously. It involves the number of students who try out at the beginning and the number who actually finish that activity at the end of the year, and the average of that is equated points that are used in helping determining an ultimate point total. On page 3, continuing along, there are points established and added to the total for travel supervision. Different kinds of activities involve the supervision of students traveling to and from activities, games, practices, or meetings. In some instances, that involves overnight travel, and of course, that is weighted higher than normal day or evening travel that might occur. There also are points associated with the supervision of other adults, where a position like the head football coach or the band director supervise assistants. There are points awarded for that supervisory role, and of course that entails more responsibility than those positions where it's simply controlled or run by one adult. Also, points are awarded for the amount of equipment and material handling that's necessary in a particular activity, including such things as inventorying and budgeting, distributing and collecting uniforms and supplies. Those are also included. This system initially involved establishing a total number of points for every position that currently existed in the district. That was a painstaking activity that took some time, but ultimately resulted in the establishment of 7 different categories of positions. Those positions were then placed in those categories, even though the total number of points didn't necessarily add up exactly in every case. What was really established was a range of total points, and that range would equate to, say, a Group 5 position. Another range of points equated to a Group 3 position, and so on. When there were final decisions made about the group assignments for each position, there were a lot of discussions about the relationship of the positions to one another. For example, if the assistant coach in a spring sport in one sport, a point total was different from the assistant coach position in another sport that had the same length of season and roughly the same number of students, there was a decision that the responsibilities were very comparable and therefore should be a common group assignment. I think you see that reflected in the positions that we have established since the origination of the system. In addition, the committee considered or included additional procedures for the recommending of new or additional positions. There is an actual procedure defined for how a new position is considered Oftentimes, there's a trial period, for example, for a club that is introduced at the high school level. There's a set of procedures for how existing positions would be reviewed if there's an appeal, for example, for a position to move from a Group 4 to a Group 5. There is a form and a procedure that people are required to go through in order for that consideration to be made by this extra duty committee. That sheet, just a sample of it, is on page 4 in the packet, and you can see that it considers those essential elements that I've gone through. At times in the action agenda, you receive a request to make a change, and typically that change results from a thorough review of that position and a decision ultimately made to bring that forward to you to consider either raising it or, in some cases, actually lowering it. Another component that is also defined in the system and the procedures that are in your pack is a formula for determining how much a coach in particular would be paid for having a season that goes beyond normal. Any of our sports teams at the high school level, for example, that go beyond the normal season because of their success, they move into district playoffs and ultimately into state playoffs. Obviously, there's a system associated for compensating them beyond what the normal rate would be for the time beyond what the regular season would expect to be if they hadn't gone into the playoffs. In the appendix section of the packet, beginning on page 8, is a history, much of which I've just summarized on page 8, 9, and 10. And then in the Appendix B section is a list of all the positions that currently exist in the district. This has been updated. It's not complete at this point, but for the most part, it's been updated to include the new middle school positions that have been added. You can see the Group 1 assignments on page 11, and you'll notice that it indicates under each column the school that's involved, the number of positions that are involved on the right-hand side of the column. On page 12 are the Group 2 positions, and you can see that in some instances there are more than one position for a particular activity. And as you move through, the number of positions that are included in each of these groups declines as the amount of responsibility increases. The Group 3 assignments are on page 13, and on page 14, the Group 4, 5, 6, and 7 assignments are listed. You'll notice that the high school band director and the head football coach at the high school are the only ones that qualify in the Group 7 category. On the last page of the packet is a copy of the current compensation system, and you'll see, or schedule, and you'll see that that includes increases for the actual group assignment, and of course the other component that's built into this is the years of experience that the coach or advisor has in that position. That, of course, is negotiated and included in the contract, and the compensation is based upon that system. As I mentioned earlier, we have about 243 positions that exist in the district at this time. Many of those, of course, added because of our increase in activities at the middle school level, Pembroke and Penfield in particular. I'd be happy to answer any questions any of you have about the system.
Thanks, Tom. Before we entertain any questions or comments, we need to change the tape, so if we could do that now as a natural break. We'll take a 2-minute break to do that and come back for questions. Thanks, Don. Okay? I was trying. Okay.
Before I entertain your questions, there are a couple corrections on the packet. If you look on page 13, under the first column, we only have one Special Olympics advisor, not three. That should be changed. You can see that in the first column on page 13. High school Special Olympics, that should be one, not three. And also on page 14, we inadvertently left out the water polo head coach, who wouldn't appreciate that, I'm sure. Under group 5, high school water polo should be added, water polo head coach. Now, any questions you might have?
Any down at this end? Terry?
If you want to study this, since you might not have had enough time to absorb all this, I'll be happy to answer questions later as well.
Ralph?
Yes.
Ralph's turn.
I just like to comment that I probably didn't pay as much attention here tonight because a year or so ago I had the 3-hour version with us in Don's office and sat down and the one thing I will say, it's amazingly complex as you look at it, but it is fair and it's based on what the effort and what the responsibilities are, and it's a reasonable way to gauge and evaluate and adjust, and we add and delete and modify on a regular basis, and I think it's a reasonable way to do business.
Thanks, Ralph. Any other questions on this side? This side. Vicki?
Okay. We just added high school water polo to a grade group 5.
Yeah, that was
Don, that's what brought you
left
here,
off
I
the
think.
list. No, the position, you did approve the position.
Okay, volleyball?
It's just not on this list. It hadn't been updated.
Volleyball was already approved. It was, or water
No,
polo was
right.
approved. Volleyball
Okay.
was the one that brought this before
Okay,
the
it
board.
was water polo. Don, one concern that I had when the recommendation was brought forth to be changing in the middle of a season or at the beginning of a season is that the recommendations coming from the committee are often coming after a budget has been developed and to take effect in that current budget year. In other words, coming up with new spending on an already passed budget, rather than being developed, say, during the course of one year to be presented for the next budget or with the next budget so that the budgeting process maintains its integrity. It just seems difficult to explain to people how, if we didn't know these were happening at the time that we developed our budget, how did we end up with the money left in there?
Well, what happens in the budgeting process for all of the salary accounts here, and of course that includes more than just these positions, there are other positions as well, is that there's an amount of money put in per position per category. And I do that in a general sense because it's impossible to predict new people who come on board and what their level of experience will be, therefore where they will actually fit in the system. So I take an average, like a 4 or 5 year average for every position and use that to come up with budget figures. Now, obviously, some of the people who come on into a new position don't have any experience, so the compensation level is a little less. So there's some leeway built in to accommodate that. There are also cases where positions may go unfilled. I know that we always have a few positions that no one is interested in filling, and it may go unfilled for an entire year. Certain clubs in particular fall into that category. So they remain as approved positions in our system, but there are occasions where we haven't been able to fill an actual position. So there is some leeway that we really need in order to make adjustments that come through the committee process, and that's the case. There is enough money in there to accommodate some of that. Now, it's not an overwhelming amount by any means because we tighten that down as much as we can at budget time.
Okay, so then with what money's in there, it just simply may get spent on another.
That's correct.
On another provision.
I don't anticipate going over that budget line because of those changes, no.
I would say that within, while it seems to be quite a complicated process, I would certainly prefer if the committee were working toward, much as we do here with new spending programs, we should with the exception of emergency situations, be developing towards a future budget rather than adding things into an existing budget. The other comment that I would have from what I read here is that the MPEA selects those who would constitute 50% of the committee
That's correct.
for determining what these, helping decide whether or not these pay scales or group levels are going to be raised. And I see an emphasis here on parity with the extra duty scales as comparisons to our local school districts, our area school districts. I have a concern with that philosophy, given our current philosophy on salaries in general.
Mrs. Chair, let me correct something that you said. I think you said that they helped negotiate the salary schedule of 6 people on that committee. They're merely just looking at the number of points and duties and responsibilities. The salaries are negotiated as part of our bargaining agreement. Isn't that correct, Mr.
No, I meant
Schmidt?
the points.
Yeah, when the committee was established, and we've maintained it under the parameters that were set at the time, and that was that there would be equal representation, as you mentioned, from administration and NPEA, and we've maintained that, and it's worked very well. There have been times where, many times, because I've chaired the committee, where appeals have been brought forth, and since our system is so structured, there's very little leeway in making many judgments, and oftentimes the challenge is not accepted and there's no adjustment made. So I'm very proud of the integrity of it. I think it monitors that very well, and we challenge one another in the committee meetings on a particular position. It seemed to work.
Can I have clarity on one thing on the page, so I understand on page 10, the last paragraph? First line of the last paragraph, the cost of the extra duty package will be in excess of the anticipated cost for this 1985 to 86 school year. I don't understand the relationship.
That was that is a little unclear. That paragraph was written at the time the original packet was put together, and it was to reflect or to address issues for the coming year immediately after when this was established.
In other words, they hadn't
Okay,
budgeted
so
all the
this-
money in that particular year when they implemented this, Vicki, so there was the base year.
That's
Okay.
correct. That was the
It's
base
just
year.
something that perhaps should have been deleted.
That was the first year the system was put into place, and of course, since then, the grid has been part of negotiations.
Okay, I appreciate your report. I do say that some of the concern that came from the meeting that we had before dealt with the fact that we are in negotiations for a contract, and therefore the cost of extra duty pay and how much that will elevate retroactively and just how much funding could be in the extra duty budget is very much up in the air until we actually have a contract. And that had very much to do with my sentiments regarding the spending that was taking place, new spending on an existing budget, when I don't think anyone could honestly say that we know how much money is left in the extra duty pay category until we actually do have a sealed and signed contract designating what the percentage of increases actually will be there in that area. But I thank you for your report, and I thank you for letting us know just the process that's involved there. Thank you.
David, you have any questions? Don, just when you stated on page 15 that the coaches or advisors were put into their position based on their experience level in that position, and perhaps a item of clarification, a football coach, for example, that may be a head football coach for the first time, he doesn't get the 0 to 1 years. Does he get credit for his football coaching as an assistant coach for 10 years, or because he's moved up to the head coach, does he go back? I mean, if you looked at it, say I guess it wouldn't, as long as you're moving up in the scale, it wouldn't matter, but...
Well, what typically happens is anyone who applies for a position, who is granted the position, we look at their experience. And along with the athletic director, with Don Ryan, make a determination about what experience level they should be granted. Typically, if they've been an assistant coach, they're given credit as an assistant coach. If they're moving into a head coaching position, that may have some impact, but not necessarily the full number of years, for example. So we would make a judgment about how much of that would carry over into the assignment for the different position.
And the level, obviously, I mean, if we had a coach in here that was a head football coach in the NFL and then came here and only had 5 years experience.
Well, I think we'd give Rich Kotite the full 21 years there, probably. I don't know if he'd come for 5,900.
Maybe Buddy will be available in a few years, or a few weeks.
At least this year, anyway.
Well, thanks, Don, for coming back from Penndale to do this. We appreciate it.
Sure.
Any other questions of the board?
Yes.
Terry?
Thanks.
Okay.
This question's for Dennis, I think. What's the overall budget for how much money is spent in extra duty compensation?
Don will answer that.
I have that.
Don?
You knew that.
In a second.
You're mulling it over.
In all of the salary categories, now that includes more than just this piece. That includes the salary of intramural advisors, which are not noted here, chaperones, athletic directors.
That's probably more what I'm interested in anyways, the whole thing.
The whole thing. That amount for 94-95 was $687,000. And also includes the salaries for bus drivers who
extra runs.
take people on the trips and the events and so forth. So it's
And that's the full
it's
salary
bigger than
of
this
the
group.
ED, too.
Is there
Now,
benefits on
the
that?
the stipends is, I believe it's around $450,000 of that is for the actual stipends that we've talked about tonight.
Okay.
Are there benefit costs added to that, Don, associated with extra duty? Because I have seen benefits listed under the extra duty category, but I
I'm
didn't know
sorry,
if
I
they were
didn't hear that.
directly related. Are there benefit costs attached
Yes, they're in addition to those numbers, yes.
in addition?
The benefit numbers for 94-95, I think were about 98,000.
Okay, and
Dennis can double check me on that.
That's basically Social Security and retirement.
Okay.
Don, in group 1, 2, 3 to 7, do you have a breakdown of how many positions? How many people are in group 1? How many people are in group 2?
Yes. In group 1, there's 56. In group 2, there's 69. In group 3, 65. In group 4, 23. In group 5, there's 20. There are 8 positions in group 6 and 2 in group 7.
I can appreciate the integrity of the system as presented, and I think that for this kind of thing, you definitely need something as structured so that it stays, the integrity stays there. And I think that's good. My concern is the overall cost of the whole program, and maybe we need to look at either the number of positions or the dollars per position for me.
Again, of course, the dollars are negotiated, the number of positions. You'd almost have to look at each event to consider that.
I would just comment to the board, some of you may have remembered when the Souderton School District decided to relook at its extra duty contract positions. There was a huge flap in that school district. A number of advisors were contemplating resigning, and the board ultimately then decided to leave well enough alone that it was a system that was working, I believe. And
They went on strike?
No, this was a couple of years ago. I just
They-
want to
they
point
made
out,
the
this has been in
changes.
effect since 1985, and it's working. We're getting people that are that are willing to make the kind of commitment to do this work after hours. When you take some of these coaches, they put in hundreds of hours. I know that, and some of you know that from the point of view of parents. If you take that on an hourly basis, they're not making nearly what they make in other capacities in this school district in their negotiated contracts. So, you know, $600 and some thousand is a lot of money, but when you consider the amount of hours that are spent in this.
Yeah, I know, but if
It's
they
a fair
volunteered for
system.
Cub Scouts, they wouldn't get anything and it would cost them. But they'd put in a lot of hours and it would be valuable to the
That's
kids.
right. People do volunteer to be Cub Scout leaders, and a lot
And I'm
of
not
people-
asking for volunteer advisors either. I'm just commenting.
Well, I'm just pointing out that if you decide to adjust the system, you create risks.
I understand that.
Okay.
One things that I would encourage increasing, we have the science fair coordinator and the math club and the Latin, my favorite. But educational, real education, I mean,
academic,
you know,
Yeah, but
curriculum clubs.
I think sports are real education
That's
for
right.
kids.
They are.
You can't do
They
that.
round out the edges.
You know,
They
that's
do a
why
lot
we
more
have
than round out the edges. Sometimes they build up the center of a child, not round out the edges.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but, you know, the whole point, I looked at some of these and say, wow, they should be so-and-so, and we ought to move this one over here. But that's my opinion. That's why we have this process that was determined, so that we put them all on equal ground, so that you know, an advisor for an academic situation is...
Can I state my opinion?
Is what?
Can I state my
Oh,
opinion?
yeah, no, I'm saying, but
That's all I'm
that's
doing.
why I was impressed with the way that we're able to put them all on an even keel and do it by a numerical system, and I felt that was very fair.
I prefaced it, I think that is good.
Good.
That you have to do that.
Understand.
I think Terry was
I do too.
referencing the academic clubs.
Any other questions from the board
Expensive, but it's
before we
good.
open this up for the audience? Any questions from members of the audience that would like to address on this particular item? Yes, sir, Mr. Taylor.
You're right, I am Bill Taylor. I live in Lansdale, I believe. I'm going to write you all a note next week or so because it doesn't quite fit here, but I'd like to do a little more research on it. This is wonderful. As I understand it, there are 7 elements that affect the pay that goes to these people we've been talking about that are with what we compare to their classroom behavior if they were teachers teaching a subject. And one of them has to do with tenure. Now, as I understand it, the teachers are paid as teachers on the basis of tenure and training. What are the other elements that are based on their payment?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand your question.
Teachers, these people are paid for 7 categories which are not tenure and one which is tenure. Is that correct? This thing
One
we've
of
just
which
been
is
talking
tenure.
about.
The points, yeah.
Experience, yes.
Yeah, there's an experience factor and there are 7 other factors which
He's talking about the
combined
grade
to give them their pay.
Group level.
Okay, teachers are paid by the amount of training they have, which says nothing directly about how they teach. And they're paid for how long they've been teaching, which again says nothing about how they teach. What are the elements about how they teach which come into determining how much they're paid?
You mean like a performance evaluation?
Sir, that's
Mr.
not really
Taylor?
related to this particular question. I get your point, and
That'll do.
No, does he mean
Understand.
within the,
Thank
is there a
you.
performance evaluation a part of this?
We do
extra?
evaluate
No.
coaches and advisors, yes.
any other comments on this particular topic?
Yes, my name is Ben Warner. I live at 155 Jenkins Avenue, Colmar. I have a question about basically the sports. My question is, I have some children that are in sports, and I was just wondering, some kids have been cut. My kid has been cut already from sports. My question is that can't we have more teams so all these kids don't get cut? I know they get cut on ability, but my question is, can't we just get more people so we can have more teams? And like for the high school, instead of 1 football team, if our community is growing, why can't we have 2 football teams and like an A and a B? And my
sir.
question is, my other part of the question is, for the band, which we're going to have 3 middle schools, I believe, is that right? Are we going to have 3 bands? Or are we just going to have all 1 band? Because you can only have so many drummers in 1 band, and my son does play the drums. That's my other question. That's the only 2 questions I have.
I can respond to your question. In the interscholastic athletic events, the PIAA athletic programs, school can have only 1 varsity team. Okay, so you can't have 2 varsity football teams at North Penn High School. On the non-PIAA activities such as the band, you can have as many activities as the school board is willing to fund. It would be our intent that we have 3 bands at the middle schools next year. That will remain to be seen how many we actually have. That'll be part of the budget discussions this spring, I'm sure. But on the sports,
But if we had 2 schools, then we would have 2 football teams.
Two varsity.
Better opportunity for the kids.
That's
correct.
That's absolutely
Just
right.
because of the 2 buildings, not because of the population.
Exactly. Exactly.
Is that an unfair system? If we had 2 schools, we could have 2 football teams. With 1 school, we can, same population almost.
Don't know whether it's fair or unfair. That's they're
the PIAA rules.
Pennsylvania Interscholastic Athletic Association rules.
Any other questions from the audience? Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Mandy Jo Jastrzemski, and I'm from Upper Glennon. And I was wondering, on page 3, you have equipment and material responsibility. And I see under the 70 points that the choral the choral director gets 70 points for an equipment responsibility of music, basically, and the orchestra director only gets 40 points, and they're responsible for instruments and knowing how to operate those instruments plus the music. I was wondering how the committee came up with the different levels for music-related sport activities.
There, at the time, and of course this is 9 years ago, so I can't remember what everyone was thinking, but certainly they grouped these different categories based on the total amount of responsibility as it related to equipment and materials. And they must have made the determination that even though, of course, obviously there are instruments in the orchestra, that the amount of responsibility for the choral director was greater than it was for the orchestra. That relates to the number of students as well. And chorus, of course, sometimes 200 or more are involved in some of our choral organizations, and that's a lot of gowns and a lot of music, and so I can see the difference.
That would come under the supervision of students in Section E, not under the equipment responsibility.
That also translates to the amount of equipment and gowns and so forth that are associated with a position.
Because I just see somehow instruments being more of a responsibility than the number of gowns a chorus needs. That's just me, I guess. Okay.
Thank you, ma'am. Any other questions or comments? With that, that's the last item on the agenda. Thank you all for attending. Good night. We're adjourned.